Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here. Today on the big program, lots to get to, lots to talk about. Well, I'm looking at a lot of Republican-led states, and I got to tell you, it appears to me, these Republican-dominated states are moving legislation and wielding power to return states to the good old days, when workers were desperate and poorly educated and, well, the wealthy and powerful ruled the roost. Ah, yes. Repealing the 20th century. And look, this is if you look around and pay attention to what these states are doing, it's all about repealing the 20th century. It's all about restoring power to, well, the rich and powerful. And one of those things that keeps popping up every day, my box is full of stories of child labor again. I cannot believe that we're in a moment where there are forces out there going, you know what? We don't have enough cheap labor. We don't have enough people willing to do these crummy jobs. Let's get the kids to do it. Yeah, bring in the kids, bring in the children. And the thing is, if you know the history of how we fought back against child labor, and you know the history of how horrible things were, I point back to our trip to Scranton during the Working Class Heroes radio tour, where we did the coal mine tour. And the tour guides were talking about what it was like to be a 6, 7-year-old working in the mine. Yes, you heard that right. A 6 or 7-year-old working in the mine, and how the 6, 7, 8-year-olds had a 50% fatality rate. I thought we were like, no, we're not going to do that anymore. We're better than that. We're going to wait till they get to be 18 before we use and abuse them. Evidently not. And the thing is you go back and you understand the history of what it took and how hard it was to get kids out of the mines and into the classroom. Because look, everybody wants their kids to learn, good work ethic, wants to learn a value of a buck. Nobody's saying that kids shouldn't do things. When I was a kid, everybody had a paper route. I had a paper route. My friends had paper routes. I had a paper route from the time I was 8 all the way through high school. No one's saying that kids shouldn't learn to be industrious and entrepreneurial, however you want to frame that. It's getting out of these dangerous situations. It's putting the priority on school, on getting ahead and learning a lesson than it is at getting cheap labor. And you go back and you think about, by the early 20th century, we had, some 2 million kids under the age of 16 in the workforce, working 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week. Because we didn't have any maximum hour laws. There were no minimum wage laws. There were no real child labor laws. And it was one of these things where you had to. Kids had to work so the families could survive. There are forces that want to take us back to those days. And you think about the legislation, because we didn't do this out of the goodness. Corporate America didn't do this out of the goodness of their heart. There wasn't a benevolent employer who goes, you know what? Those poor little children, I just love the babies so much, we're not going to use and abuse them in the workplace. That's not how this worked. It wasn't until 1936 that the federal government said, you know what? Contracts over $10,000, we're not going to give anyone a contract if they're using labor under the age of 16. Boys under 16, girls under 18. Yes, we were sexist back then. And that was just through government procurement. That wasn't the entire economy. It took till 1938, the Fair Labor Standards Act, that we finally said, maybe we shouldn't have kids in the workplace. Maybe we should have them in the classrooms. And it said during the year, kids had to be, during the school year, had to be 16 years of age, couldn't do jobs that were considered dangerous by the Secretary of Labor. And this worked for a good long time. But here we're in this moment. We're in this moment where it's getting worse because the violations are slap on the wrist at best. In fact, in 2022, child labor violations increased by 37%. And you go, well, how is that possible? Well, a big part of it is we're finally looking for it. So I'm thinking that's part of it. But we've seen some pretty sizable cases where you've got young kids working at Hyundai and Kia. You see them at these meatpacking plants, and you see them, all across the fast food industry. And what we know is younger workers have a much higher rate of injury, have a much higher rate of injuries that need medical attention, and are going to be more likely to not report than anybody else. It's one of those things. And you look across the country. We've been talking about Iowa for the last couple of weeks because Iowa is the most egregious case of all. This idea that we're going to remove a bunch of child labor barriers, and then we're going to issue waivers to companies that are working with an apprenticeship program with the local school. So we're going to create a pipeline from the school to the factories, and then no liability shields. So if the kids get hurt, whose fault is that? School's not going to claim that responsibility. The company's been shielded from liability. Who's going to fall on? Yeah, the kids and the family. Exactly what corporate America wants. But this isn't even just that. I mean, Iowa's one thing. Ohio is has evidently reintroduced a piece of legislation to extend work hours to 14 and 15-year-olds. You got Minnesota introduced a bill that would allow 14 and 15-year-olds to work during the school year. Wisconsin, the governor there just vetoed a bill that would have expanded work time for 14 and 15-year-olds. And you go, when does this stop? It doesn't. Corporate America's insatiable appetite and need for cheap labor, exploitable labor, will never end. And this is where we, parents, citizens, people who were fortunate enough to have a childhood and fortunate enough to have reasonable people say, there's jobs we want you to do and you can do, but you shouldn't be competing with your parents for jobs to support the family. There was a moment in this country where things were pretty good for working families. One income could support a family. You had the breadwinner go out. You had into the workforce. You had someone stay home, take care of the household, take care of the kids, do all the things that needed to be done. You took vacations, got cars every once in a while. Life was good. Sent the kids off to college. They got good opportunities to move on and do better. And there was this snowball of prosperity for working people. Now, some would say, well, that came at the expense of our billionaires because we didn't have a lot of billionaires back then. In fact, didn't have any. Now we got over 1,000, and some of them are just outrageously wealthy because we've seen a massive redistribution of wealth from the people who actually do the work and create the wealth to the people who, well, I had an idea and I made a bunch of other people do it. But we give them tax breaks and we socialize their risk and we do all this stuff to ensure that they're well taken care of at the expense of who? Ask yourself, what kind of future do you want for your kids? Look, I want my kids to be able to learn the value of a dollar and get a good work ethic. I do. But there's a moment where you go, I want them safe first. I don't want them exploited, and I don't want them competing with me for the same job. Because that's not how this system should work. But corporate America, that's what they're taking. Now, Ohio is a particularly interesting state because right now Ohio is on a mission to become Mississippi and well on its way. The Ohio Republicans have introduced their first piece of legislation, going to lower the state's income tax and the state's property tax. And you go, well, how are they going to pay for that, Rick? How will Ohio, giving all this wealth away, how's this going to work out? Well, they're going to cut it from education. And you know where the education funding cuts come from? Well, the poorer school districts. Of course it does. And where do you think those poor kids eventually are going to end up? Well, 14, 15 years old, working in the meatpacking plants. I mean, it's amazing to me. Now, today I saw this report from the Department of Labor that this company, Packers Sanitation Services Incorporated, They just got fined $1.5 million in penalties. And you go, wow, that's a lot. What'd they get fined for? Well, it turns out the company used at least 102 children from the ages of 13 to 17 doing hazardous work. What's hazardous? Being around hazardous chemicals, cleaning the meat processing supplies, the back saws, the brisket saws, the head splitters. Just going in there and getting there because you got little hands. Little hands fit in those little spaces can clean things really well. Now you go, wow, that's a lot of money. $1.5 million, a lot of money. No, it works out to about $15,000 a head. So about $15,000 for every violation. And you go, that doesn't seem like a lot. You read further into the report, that's the maximum penalty that you can give. So even if they had a 6-year-old working in there, the maximum penalty is $15,138. And you go, why aren't we locking people up? Because we don't do that to employers. We don't lock them up. We don't. And OSHA, the most serious violation that you get there is not a little bit more than $14,000 for the most serious. If you die on the job, if you get killed, it's only $70,000. That's the maximum fee. So I've often said, and I've said this for years, if I ever really wanted to kill someone, I would just hire them. I would give them a job and set up a dangerous situation that I know they're gonna fall into and collapse on them, and it would only cost me $70,000. Now that I've said this out loud, there goes my grandmaster plan. But this is how crazy our labor laws have become. This is how crazy this stuff is. And you go, but Rick, they're a big company. It could have been, a mistake. Yeah, a lot of these plants, because there were a number of plants across the country that this Packers Sanitation Services owns and runs. There were a couple of them that had one violation. And you go, okay, that could have been a mistake. It could have been a paperwork mix-up. Someone, was desperate and, tried to get their kid in there because the family needed the money. That you could almost see. But in 3 locations, one had 22, one had 26, one had 27 underage kids working in their place. You go, now that's a little more systematic. That seems like, well, somebody's recruiting these kids, and someone's not doing their jobs. But here's the thing, and this is where this is the other part of this. It's only $15,000. It's $15,000 in penalties for hiring these kids who you probably hired at half the wage with no benefits. So how much did the companies make? And is this really a penalty? Is it really something that's a big deal? Now you got this trampoline park in Jacksonville, Florida. They just got fined $43,000 for violating 55 minor-aged kids and the law there. Worked them after 7 p.m., cheated them out of overtime. The general churn. A little slap on the wrist. Don't do it again. Post a notice. And that's sadly what our labor laws have become over the years. And this is why I get so frustrated and go, look, this is the reason you need to join and form unions. This is the reason we need a strong, vibrant labor movement, because this stuff doesn't happen in unionized workplaces. And the places that are trying to organize, they're screwing them over too. I look at Starbucks. Story just came out about Starbucks. They fired 2 people in connection with the Philadelphia campaign to organize, according to the National Labor Relations Board. So these 2 people they're going to get their jobs back probably with back pay, but the penalties for this are non-existent. So they get fired. Okay, so let's say you worked 40 hours a week at $10 an hour. That's $400 a week. So you're off, 10 weeks. That's $4,000 that the company would have to pay at the most. At the most. Now, if you went out and got a job making $3,000, they only owe you $1,000. Our laws are so boogered up and so screwy that it would be, if you're a lawyer advising these companies on how to break the union, it's almost malpractice to not tell them to fire people, because the victory of putting the chilling effect in the workplace and scaring the hell out of everybody else so that they don't vote for a union, it much weighs out the negatives of having to pay a couple of bucks on the other side and then promising you won't do it again until, of course, the next time you do it. And this is where I keep coming back to the reality of how bad our labor law is. And I talk to people who go, well, if I got fired illegally, I'd just, file a lawsuit. And good luck on that. You know how often that works? Almost never. This, again, why we need to have strong labor unions. Because this stuff doesn't happen. People don't get cheated out of wages, and when they do, there's someone to fight for them. You don't feel like you're out on an island. And, for me, there's this moment where I'm hoping all of this stuff people are paying attention to. The fact that we're really talking about putting kids back in dangerous jobs. We're talking about putting them back into dangerous jobs with immunity for employers. I mean, it's mind-blowing. But as I say, they want to take us back to the good old days. Back to the Lochner era, before there were any rules to abusing workers at all. Back to where if you wanted to work 100 hours for a buck an hour, that was your right. It was your liberty. It's your freedom. There are folks who want to do this again. And 6 of them are sitting on our Supreme Court. So when these things come up to challenge, when states pass this horrible, and it's the reason it's happening, they know the Supreme Court's not going to step in. There's no backstop here. The only backstop, an aggressive, strong, powerful labor movement. That a militant movement of working people, not ideologues, not right, left hat wearers, but actual people who want to fight for better wages, hours, conditions, and opportunities for their kids. We're on the wrong path, folks. On the wrong path. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I'm looking at Donald Trump. Evidently, Donald Trump wants to embrace mail-in balloting now. Evidently, and look, this is a Republican thing now. They're now coming around to the idea that, well, this mail-in ballot, maybe we should, I don't know, think about it. The report came out from the Wall Street Journal that Trump's team is studying state laws governing absentee and mail-in voting, as well as ballot collection, called ballot harvesting, in which third parties gather and turn in votes. People familiar with the effort said. So basically, they're going to try and go, hey, it'll work for Democrats. Maybe we shouldn't be against helping people vote. And you go, this is the weird thing. And I always wondered about this, why Republicans didn't gather on to the idea of mail-in voting and ballot harvesting as well. It was mind-blowing to me because they're better organized, much better organized than the Democrats are. If you remember when Sam Alito was going through the nomination process to get on the Supreme Court, they had these Justice Sunday things where they were linking up thousands of churches on these video conference calls and how they were going to get out there and they were going to fight for their man Alito so that he could get on the Supreme Court. And they were outwardly saying it. Alito's going to be the guy who's going to, do all the things we want, like end abortion and, go after those people and, make God great again. And they were literally linking up thousands of churches. And I remember saying back then, Democrats, you better pay attention to what they're doing because they are doing a masterful job of on-the-ground, old-school organizing. I remember an interview years and years ago with the guy Ralph Reed, where someone had asked him, how did you build your grand religious coalition of insaniacs? And he pulled out the SWOC handbook, the Steelworkers Organizing Committee handbook, and said, here it is, old school labor organizing, face to face, hand to hand, door to door, worker to worker organizing, bringing people together, coalescing around common ideas. And Democrats haven't done that. They've done really a crummy job of it. And you look at what Republicans have been able to do through media, through academia. I mean, look, they claim, every campus is liberals. And you go, I don't know. Most of the professors I had going through college were staunch conservatives. Most of my high school teachers were staunch conservatives. This idea that they're all hippie liberals pushing, indoctrination is a nice narrative, but not the reality. But this is what they get to do when they build the organizing campaign around creating their own truth, alternative facts, alternative realities, So for me, it was curious why Republicans didn't grab onto it. Okay, we want ballot harvesting? Sure. We'll make sure that everyone in the church is registered, and we'll make sure that they hand us the ballot. In fact, we'll have Ballot Sunday, where we can have people come in and we'll help them fill out their ballots. It's always curious why they didn't do that. But now kind of changing their tune, because you look here in Pennsylvania, where Doug Mastriano just got slaughtered in the polls. The ballot wasn't even close. He got beat worse than any gubernatorial candidate in this state in my lifetime. And a big part of it is the fact that Shapiro got more than 1 million mail-in votes, and Mastriano just got like 187,000. I mean, it was over 5-1 in favor of Shapiro. Now you go, well, those people just didn't show up to the poll, and there's truth to that. What Republicans have always tried to do is put that barrier between people in the ballot box. But by giving them the ability to do it from home, the number of votes went up. That's what Republicans are afraid of. And now kind of changing their tune a little bit. Because even Mastriano on some right-wing talk show in Philadelphia, he said, look, I didn't embrace it. Obviously during the campaign, we probably should have used it as the Democrats had, because I don't see how we win elections without embracing that idea. And you got Trump now saying kind of the same thing. So the Republican talking point now is kind of going to be to come around to a different idea of, maybe we should be embracing this stuff. Because again, they've got the organizing to do it. Now they embrace this, they got their organizing part, and continue all of the assaults on voting rights like they did in Georgia and they've done in other places. Keep putting those barriers between, certain groups of people, mostly poor people, and the ballot box. They see that as their way to victory. Because look, as long as they can keep the number of people voting down, they know they got a shot. But when we all vote, they lose, and they lose badly. Because their ideas are bad. Their policy aims are horrible. That's the reality of the world that we're in, and they know it as well as anyone. Which is why you're seeing the schemes to stop people from voting, like, let's not let 18-year-olds vote. Raise the age to 21, because they don't want college kids voting. In fact, they're taking voting off of college campuses across this country. Gee, I wonder why. Love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1936. That was the day more rubber workers sat down in Akron, Ohio. Tire builders in Goodyear's Plant Number 2, Department 251A, sat down when 700 co-workers were laid off. Goodyear had been running 4 6-hour shifts. They hoped to reduce the workforce by implementing 3 8-hour shifts with no increase in pay. Management moved quickly to fire all of the strikers. By this day, all 4,000 workers at Goodyear voted to strike over the layoffs and firings, the speed-ups, and the new shift hours and pay. The enormous 11-mile facility was immediately shut down. In his book, Strike, historian Jeremy Breacher indicates that few, if any, were union members. The United Rubber Workers Union was hesitant to associate itself with the sit-down. Rubber workers organized themselves. They set up 24-hour pickets at dozens of gates, built built striker shanties and set their demands. After 6 days, the United Rubber Workers Union sanctioned the strike. Breacher described the scene writing, quote, "The company secured an injunction against mass picketing. 10,000 tradespeople from across the city gathered with lead pipe and baseball bats to stop 150 sheriff's deputies from opening the plants. The Summit County Central Labor Council guaranteed a general strike if Law and Order League vigilantes carried out their threatened March 18th attack on picket lines. The vigilante movement was paralyzed. Federal mediators demanded a return to work and arbitration. Workers responded, no, 1,000 times no. I'd rather die than say yes. Finally, Goodyear capitulated on most of the demands, except formal recognition of the union. Rubber workers returned to work largely victorious. After renewed struggles, workers finally won union recognition a year later.
Please be my Valentine. That is not only a warm, sweet, sometimes romantic sentiment people express in mid-February on frilly red cards. It's also the name of a 3rd century saint who literally lost his head, a 9th century pope whose reign lasted only 40 days, 3 Roman emperors, a very good Mexican hot sauce, and a tiny town in Texas. That town has a genuinely sweet story to tell and a unique role to play in the sending of thousands of Valentine's Day sentiments to people around the world. Valentine, Texas, population 217, was founded by the Southern Pacific Railroad in the 1880s and reportedly was named for one of the corporation's big shareholders. Nothing romantic about that. But in recent years, would-be Cupids have turned the town's name and, believe it or not, its one-room post office into a center of affectionate expression. What happened is that romantics from distant places began to batch up their pre-addressed stamped valentines and zip them to this postal outpost way out on the Texas-Mexico border. Why? Because to give their sentimental missives extra oomph, they wanted them to bear the special touch of being mailed from an actual place named Valentine. The greatest thing about our public postal workers is that they literally deliver, and the Valentine branch goes the extra mile to provide this loving gesture at no extra charge. Ismelda Ornelas, postmaster of the 79854 office, hand stamps each envelope herself. Indeed, the Valentine Post Office is now officially designated the Love Station. Moreover, the local school district holds an annual art contest among students to design each year's Valentine postmark, which is then stamped on each envelope. This is Jim Hightower saying, see, while the media tells us our world is going to hell, here's another grassroots example of loving, creative people going.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, I've been getting tons of email on this, on the derailment and asking the question, where's the federal government been? And yesterday on the program, we talked about the response from the DOT, from the EPA being there almost immediately, and how, the reality is that this falls on the states. The governor has to request a lot of this other stuff, and oh boy, no one happy with that response. But hey, that's how our system is set up. I love my conservative friends who tell me they believe in states' rights. And then when I say this is a states' rights issue, not happy about it. I'm here to share some thoughts on what's going on the ground in East Palestine, and what the federal government can and should be doing, and what we should be doing long term in the aftermath of this. I've asked Congressman Chris DeLuzio to come talk with us. Congressman represents the 17th Congressional District here in Pennsylvania. Congressman, thanks for taking time for us.
Yeah, Rick, thanks for having me on.
So let's start with the first point there. As I understand it, FEMA or the EPA was there, DOT was there. There were a number of federal agencies on the ground when this happened, as they were supposed to. This is how the gig works, right? FEMA's not jumping in. The federal government isn't taking these things over. These are states' issues, right?
Yeah, and look, on my side of the border in Pennsylvania, and for folks who don't know, people I represent in Beaver County in Pennsylvania were evacuated. They were within that zone, like the folks in East Palestine were. My governor, Josh Shapiro, anything that the state has needed from the federal government, they're getting. And part of my job and the senators who I'm working with is to make sure that's happening. And I understand on the Ohio side, same thing, whether it's EPA, CDC, The National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, that's who's going to do and is doing the investigation. They're doing it. And anything that we're getting asked from our state counterparts, we're making sure is delivered to these folks. And frankly, that's gone right from the president, that whatever the federal government needs to do, they're there.
So let me ask you straight out then, because the reporting that I'm getting is that the people aren't getting what they need, and that there's some failure by the administration. So what are the conditions on the ground? You were there. What did you see?
Look, people are scared. People are mad. And people are worried about their water and their air, their animals, right? And so part of what I'm trying to get out to folks and what I saw is there is testing, air and water. If you want it in your house and you're in that area, it's there. And the federal government's doing the air side of it. The state EPs are doing the water. Those tests are there. And I've been telling people, request them. My office, the Republican across the way in Ohio, same thing. They're there to help people get them. And that's what people ought to do so they feel safe.
Yeah.
And
so
that's the most important thing the government could be doing here is making sure your water and your air is safe. Your animals and wildlife are safe.
Now, I'm looking at some of the bomb throwers in Congress, some of your colleagues who are saying, this is all Biden's fault, evidently. There must have been an executive order, who knows? But this is all Biden's fault. It's all the federal government's fault. Because evidently the water is not safe to drink and they want Biden to drink the water. I'm sure you've seen all this craziness.
Yeah.
Is this helpful?
Look, it's partisan crap. That's what these guys do. They're fundraising off this stuff. They're looking to get reelected off this stuff. And by the way, if they want to go back and look at history, and I've been in the Congress now, I guess 6 weeks. You want to go back a couple of years, it was Donald Trump and the Republicans carrying water for the railroads, whether it was, rules around staffing, safety, this precision scheduled railroading doctrine, which is right out of Wall Street, where they're extracting every penny of profit they can on the backs of their workers and everything else, and our safety. That's the GOP doing the work of these railroads. And that's the environment in which we have derailments like this, where these railroads are stretching their trains longer. I mean, look, let's be even pretty direct. This railroad and others lobbied against a 2-person staffing requirement. And luckily, there were 3 workers on this train that derailed. And I've heard direct from the union representing those folks that if there weren't 3 of them on there, if there had been 1, they would have been able to take the action they did to help mitigate how bad this could have been. So there are real consequences for this, corporate lobbying and frankly, bootlicking we're seeing on the right.
Yeah, I mean, both the trains, one in East Palestine and the one outside of Detroit that derailed. Because again, these derailments are not as infrequent as we're led to believe. They happen quite often. Fortunately, we don't have ones as big as what happened in East Palestine. But this 9,300 feet long. I mean, this is like a 1.5 mile long train. I don't know how only 3 people can care for that, but good on those workers for being able to, but shame on the industry for forcing them to.
Well, and look, these workers have been beat up for a while. I mean, good luck taking a day of sick leave in that job, which is a tough job on top of everything else. And I think that there is going to be a lot more awareness of how hard this job is. And frankly, that these workers have been sounding the alarm about this industry.
Yeah.
The place I represent, Western PA, like a lot of places in this country, these tracks run through our neighborhoods. They run through our towns. So many of us live close to them. And people are scared about whether this might happen again. I'm sure it will happen somewhere again. But we got to make it so that this isn't the norm, and that when this does happen, that these railroads are held accountable and they make every single person, business, you name it, whole for what they've done.
Now, I find it interesting, and I look at some of your colleagues, some of the bomb throwers, the anti-government folks who are out now screaming, they ran on government shouldn't do anything, can't do anything, we need to privatize everything, now screaming that the government isn't, in their view, doing anything. I find it interesting that people who don't believe in government, when things happen like this, are the first ones to scream and complain that government isn't doing anything. It just seems odd to me.
Well, Rick, here's a basic way to test that. Do you want Norfolk Southern and their contractors to test your water, or do you want your state environmental protection department? Of course you want your state doing that. People don't trust this railroad that just wrecked their neighborhoods. The government is there to do that testing because they don't have a financial stake in this, whereas you've got a railroad who wants to show that their harms were less than they actually caused, less they got to end up paying for this. So I think it's an important lesson in rebuilding some trust and faith in the agencies that are designed to keep us safe and take care of us when something like this, God forbid, happens again.
Now, here's the thing, though, Congressman. Over the summer, we were talking with a number of the rail unions about their contract. And the first thing that's going to get thrown up at you is, well, the president didn't do enough to get those workers sick days, didn't listen to the warnings that were being thrown out. In this environment, it appears to me the only people who got it right were the workers who were saying, hey, we're not working in safe conditions. Hey, look at this. And sadly now, I guess I should pose this as a question. Will we learn from this, or will this be another instance where it's just, hey, bad things happened, and once it's out of the news cycle, it goes away?
I think we have to learn from this. I think we will. I mean, what I'm seeing and hearing on the ground in PA across the border in Ohio is people are fired up for something to change. I'm hearing it across the country. I'm hearing it from my colleagues in the House. And, the workers here have been sounding the alarm about this industry, about this precision scheduled railroading, this PSR idea that just maximizes operational efficiency at whatever cost, driven by Wall Street. So I think we're going to be looking hard at what this industry is doing, not just in this specific derailment, but how we prevent the next one. And so that we're not in this situation again, especially when we're hearing it direct from the people who make these railroads run, who do that hard work day in, day out, about how we can be safer.
So, but here's the thing, the question then comes down to, what are we going to do? I mean, you tweeted out today, railroads have been squeezing every penny of profit they can at the expense of safety. I'll be fighting for you to hold Norfolk Southern accountable. Great. I want to hear that. But what are you going to do? How do we've given so much power to this industry. We've allowed industry after industry across the country to consolidate and almost monopolize. And that we've given them such enormous power to regulate themselves and police themselves, because there are some who believe, well, government shouldn't be policing. The companies, they'll do what's in their best interest. And I agree, they do, in their own best interest, not ours. How will you hold them accountable? And is there an appetite, since Democrats don't hold the House, to actually hold hearings and to actually get to the bottom of this?
I hope so. I don't know the answer to that yet, of whether the Republicans who control these committees now are going to be tough on these guys. I hope so. I think there's bipartisan interest here. Jury's still out. We'll see. I'm hoping my Republican colleagues are there with us. The things I'd want to see, in the Congress, is we got to look at these staffing levels. We got to look at all of these ways in which the railroads here are stretching to do what they want to do to keep their, operating efficiency at the highest possible point. Stretching out the length of these trains, the number of cars, the kinds of notifications we give to towns, what qualifies as hazardous materials, what that means the railroads have to do. And then, of course, there's the real stuff of the EPA and others making sure that this railroad pays every penny it has to make people whole. Now, I can't control that in the Congress, but I can push the agencies to do exactly that. I know my governor and the team in Harrisburg in Pennsylvania are doing their part on the state side as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's an awful lot to this. But it comes down to me, Congressman, of basic philosophy. This idea that, and I've had a bunch of conservatives yelling at me that, because I've been advocating for, regulating these industries for years, this idea that regulations are job killers. And I look at this and I go, how many people could have been killed had this gone even worse than it went? So for me, the lack of regulation, to me, is scarier than a couple of extra regulations.
Well, look, if the Republicans want to be the corporate bagmen, they want to be the party that's all about mergers and these huge corporations ripping us off, they should do that, and we'll own them every November. Because the people of this country, I don't care if you're conservative, left, you name it, they're tired of getting ripped off. They're tired of getting pushed around, and workers are tired of not being able to form and join a union and have some say on the job. So if the Republicans want to go fight online, culture war stuff and carry water for huge corporations like Norfolk Southern, go do it. And we'll own you, and we'll run this country for people.
Good stuff. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show here with Pennsylvania Congressman Chris DeLuzio. He represents Pennsylvania's 17th Congressional District. I want to change topics real quick and congratulate you on doing something that I've been saying Democrats need to do every day, and that's adopt a striker. The people out at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette have been on strike for, it's several months now. And you took one of the striking workers to the State of the Union address, and good on you for doing that. What made you make that choice?
Look, in my area, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette's the paper of record by most accounts, and the ownership there has just been in a brutal fight against their workers for a long, long time. These folks have been without a contract, I think since 2017. They haven't had a pay raise in more than 16 years. And, the owners pulled their health care, and that was enough. They went on strike, and they've been out for more than 4 months now. I was on the picket with those guys this week, and I brought with me as my State of the Union guest down to Washington, Hutchie Van Landingham, one of the mailers at the paper, who's a third-generation worker there. And, this newspaper has been central to our region. They've done great reporting and work over time, but, this current generation of owners doesn't seem to respect the folks who make that paper run. And those workers are fighting. And what I wanted to do was not just, honor Hutchie and these other workers, but bring their fight to the national stage. I mean, people have to listen to what they're standing up for, and frankly, what workers across this country are fighting for as we see more and more strikes, more and more elections, and workers winning those elections.
Yeah, it's great to see, but the sad reality is our labor laws are so badly broken and ossificated that I fear that while we're winning elections and we're seeing all this energy, it doesn't equate to contracts, and it doesn't equate to making lives better. And that's my fear when the employers have this much outweighted power, even with a president who says, he's the most pro-labor, and I don't disagree with him, the most pro-labor president in my lifetime. Our laws are that bad that, even, people who want to join and form unions, it's a Herculean leap where it shouldn't be.
Well, that's absolutely right. And I agree. And I was born in 1984. And Joe Biden is easily the most pro-union president of my life. But it doesn't change the fact that we need the PRO Act. For folks who don't know what that is, right? It changes so that we get to an equal playing field for workers to form and join a union. So if a company union busts, they actually have some meaningful penalties. For now, you fire someone who's organizing, and maybe you have to pay back wages months, years down the road. That's not enough of a deterrent. It's not enough of a penalty. Yeah. And I think we know, and anyone who's fought for a union knows, those penalties are too weak. And it's too hard to do, especially if you're in a small shop.
Because this is where I'm telling my Democratic friends, folks like you, we need champions right now. Because if you look at what's going on the other side, I'm looking at Iowa. Iowa is right now talking about putting children back into dangerous workplaces and creating an environment where employers can hire children liability free. It's like we're going back to the 80s and 90s and not the 1980s and 90s.
That's nuts. And look, here's the part of this too for why the PRO Act is so important from where I sit. If we pass the PRO Act, the right to work anti-worker laws across the states go away. The states that have them, those laws are repealed if we pass the PRO Act. Because what happens is you have such a different landscape state to state where workers in these anti-union states have very few rights, nothing. And as we see manufacturing starting to trickle back to this country, states like mine, where you have a little more dignity as a worker, you have a little more rights to join and form a union, those employers aren't going to bring the job to states like mine. They're going to go the lowest common denominator where they got the most power over their workers.
No, and the way I've been saying for a long time is how we reunite this country is we bring those jobs back because people want those jobs. But more importantly, people don't want factory jobs and manufacturing jobs as much as they want union jobs, as much as they want jobs that pay a good wage with health care and retirement security and job security and being part of a family, of building a community. That's what people are pining for, not those dirty factory jobs that I remember as a kid, but it was the opportunities that it gave them. That's what people want.
Yeah, look, it's the basic pitch of what this American dream is supposed to be. You work hard, you play by the rules, you get a decent life, you go to the doctor when you're sick, your kids go to school, you can retire with dignity. That isn't the reality for too many people in this country, and I'm hoping to be part of doing something to change that.
I'm hoping for you too. Last question I've got for you, back to the derailment. What are we looking at in the next couple of days? How are you seeing things play out? Do you have any thoughts of what we should be watching out for?
Well, we're still in this, as the EPA describes it, this kind of emergency phase where we're doing everything as the government, federal, state, local, to keep people safe, to address these chemicals that were released. That's even before we get into the longer term remediation and mitigation phase of this. So we aren't there yet. So for now, it's making sure folks are safe and feel safe. That's testing air and water, making sure it's okay to be in your home. That's where we are. And this cleanup is really focused on this emergency phase. And there's going to be a long-term frankly, effort. And I've heard the president's cabinet and the president say the federal government is here as long as it takes, and they got to be. The reps on the other side of the border and me in Pennsylvania were making sure they are, because these people who were affected, my constituents and the folks in Ohio, they deserve to be able to live their lives, not worried about their health, their kids' health. And I think this government got to do everything it can to deliver that.
Absolutely. Representative, I appreciate you taking time for me. I hope you'll come back and share some more thoughts as this continues down the road. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, Rick.
Good stuff, Congressman Chris Deluzio. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break right back after this. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1932. That was the day that working people in the United States said goodbye to one of their great heroes. Florence Kelley was born in 1859. Her father, William D. Kelley, was a U.S. Senator. Senator Kelley was an abolitionist and was concerned about the conditions under which working people toiled. He passed that concern on to his daughter. Florence enjoyed the finest education, studying at Cornell University, the University of Zurich, and the Union College of Law. She became a vocal opponent of child labor and sweatshop conditions. She found camaraderie with like-minded women, including Jane Addams and Ellen Gates Starr at Hull House in Chicago. Kelley soon became an important addition to the work of this famed settlement house. Jane Addams' nephew remembered her as the finest rough-and-tumble fighter for the good life of others that Hull House ever knew. She began to visit local factories around Hull House to document unsafe working conditions and the use of child labor. Based on her careful research, the Illinois legislature passed a law banning children under the age of 14 from working in factories. Florence was named the first ever chief factory inspector in the state of Illinois. From Chicago, she moved on to New York, where she helped to found the National Consumer League. The league supported the fight for the 8-hour workday and was a leader in the fight against sweatshops. Florence was also a founding member of the NAACP. She helped to found the National Child Labor Committee, a group dedicated to ending child labor. In response to their work, in 1912, the U.S. Children's Bureau became part of the federal government. It was the only federal agency at the time run by women. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
So it's being reported that on Wednesday, Donald Trump is going to be visiting East Palestine, Ohio. And you go, why? Why is that? What can he possibly bring to East Palestine that would be helpful? Is he going to bring a box of paper towels with him? I mean, is that what's going to happen? You're going to be throwing out the magic paper towel roll? I mean, is this what we're going to see? And it's or is it really just about ego? Because he doesn't bring any resources with him. It's all about ego. And he's not going to bring anything helpful. All he's going to do is clog up the area with more hot air and not helpful. And this is the thing. This is the thing about my conservative friends who love to complain. Well, what has Joe Biden done? Joe Biden's done his job. His job is to support the states, get them what they need, get the EPA out there, get the Department of Transportation out there, and the machinery doing what it's supposed to be doing. That's happening. And to be honest, this is what Biden does, his job. We don't need to see mean tweets. We don't need to see, hey, look at how wonderful a job I'm doing. And this is what drives Republicans crazy. Because they need attention. They need to be fed with attention. It's not enough to do the right thing. They need the affirmation. They need the, oh, you're so wonderful. And again, this comes back down to that whole Christian extremist thing too. I grew up in the Catholic Church at a time when they talked about peace and social justice, and that your good works shouldn't be something you display, which is why when we do charitable work, when we donate to charities, which we do every year, I never say who I donate to. I never want anything back. I never want someone to say, oh, look how wonderful you were. Do it because it's the right thing to do. Do it because I want to. And again, this comes back to I got into a whole bunch of trouble saying that we should be taxing churches, which I believe. I don't donate to a church or to a charitable organization because I want a tax break. Donate it because I think they do good work and I want them to continue to do good work. The tax break just comes because, well, we've made that policy because evidently some need that affirmation. And this is another thing. I mean, the Republican Party's hatred of government is, well, on display. Because evidently, according to them, everything's Biden's fault. And this is where this gets weird, because understand, a lot of this is their deregulation religion, their fetish of deregulating and allowing corporate America to do whatever it is they want. And, they've used their media empire to do this, which is why I think it's so important right now that people pay attention what's going on with this lawsuit with the voting machine companies, with Dominion and the other one. Why it's so important to pay attention to what's being said in the court. Now, remember, all during the 2020, there was election fraud, and the Giuliani out there, making these wild, bizarre claims, and Sidney Powell making these really bizarre claims. I said, I don't listen to anything they say at the Four Seasons landscaping parking lot. Believe nothing there. What did they walk into court, put their hand on the Bible, swear to tell the whole truth, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help them, the God that they claim to love so much. What do they say then? That's what you pay attention to. And for me, it's what those lawyers bring into court, because there are consequences for not telling the truth. So now when the F channel has come forth with all of this information, and we now find out what I've been saying for years, that none of these people believe the BS that they're spewing. It's all about the money. It's all about duping the poorly educated into continuing to consume the outrage candy. It's the same thing with right-wing radio. It's the same thing with a lot of media portions. It's about getting you angry enough that I can't turn away. I've got to consume more. I got to have more because I got to have more information to attack those people at work. Or this is what they were masterful at. My question now becomes, all of the dupes and people with their mouth open on the toilet doing their research, watching Hannity, will they believe what he said? Will those people believe what the F channel said in court, and that they're not news, they're entertainment, and that they didn't buy the election fraud stuff? They tried to get a reporter fired because, that reporter challenged the president. It's bad for our stock price. Will they believe it? Or sadly, what I know is going to happen, they're not going to believe what was said in court. They're not going to believe, because that's, it's court, it's government, it's bad. Because they've been trained like Pavlovian dogs to think anything that government has to do with bad. What I see on the F channel, more. We're in scary times. But the stuff going on in court, everyone should be paying attention to. And look, fortunately, I think there's a chance that the F channel, they're effed. They're the F channel, all right. This lawsuit potentially could take them down, cost them billions, and maybe even take them down. Wouldn't that be good?
This morning we declared a national emergency for only the third time in our history.
Back-to-back extreme weather disasters trigger national state of emergency in New Zealand.
There's many, many ways in which the ice can change, and we're seeing all of them.
New studies find global warming is melting Antarctica's ice. Plus,
this train apparently was not considered a high hazardous material train. This is absurd.
Growing concerns about safety for residents near Ohio chemical train derailment.
All of those concerns and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
So where's the EPA? If they say my plastic straw is destroying this country, then they must be all over a cancer-causing gas bomb in the Ohio River Valley, right?
Really what we have to do is we have to make sure that our rails are safe.
Wait a minute. Why is Fox News and Marjorie Taylor Greene suddenly concerned about the EPA and toxic train spills? We'll discuss. And no, they don't say your plastic straw is destroying this country. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, this is very, very strange. It's like someone flipped a switch. Everybody over on Fox News is suddenly concerned about this train derailment and disaster in Ohio. Why is that?
Well, I think it's following a familiar pattern. Right-wing media and Republican politicians are attempting to exploit a disaster for political gain, claiming that rural white conservatives are basically being persecuted by the government's response to the Ohio train derailment.
It's those poor white people who are getting it again. I see why Fox News all of a sudden gives a damn. They're usually not concerned about the EPA. And by the way, it was Trump who rolled back Obama's safety regulations on trains that might have prevented this disaster.
Exactly. So to update, concerns are growing about safety for residents returning to their homes in the aftermath of that fiery, toxic chemical train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, nearly 2 weeks ago. Ohio officials have told residents to use bottled water until testing confirms that their local water supply is safe. In a press conference, Republican Ohio Governor Mike DeWine called it absurd that the train cars were marked non-hazardous despite their toxic cargo. DeWine called on Congress to tighten regulations for trains carrying hazardous substances, seemingly unaware that the Trump administration rolled back multiple train safety rules at the railroad industry's request, including requirements for safer braking systems.
Unaware or would just like to not notice?
As of airtime, DeWine has not requested a formal disaster declaration from President Biden to release more federal resources, contradicting baseless right-wing media claims of a lackluster federal response. In New Zealand, just weeks after record rainfall triggered deadly flooding in Auckland, a massive cyclone, Gabrielle, this week caused widespread destruction across the North Island, triggering floods and landslides, collapsing buildings, and destroying transportation, power, and communications infrastructure. New Zealand Prime Minister Chris Hipkins declared a national emergency for only the third time in the country's history. New Zealand's climate minister, James Shaw, blasted the New Zealand Parliament for its delays.
I don't think I've ever felt as sad or as angry about the lost decades that we spent bickering and arguing about whether climate change was real or not, whether it was caused by humans or not, whether it was bad or not, whether we should do something about it or not, because it is clearly here now. And if we do not act, it will get worse.
New Zealand is just having a terrible, terrible time with this. 2 major disasters in just the last few weeks.
Yes, it's very difficult to recover from that. At the South Pole, the amount of floating sea ice encircling Antarctica has reached the lowest level ever recorded for the second year in a row since the satellite era began in 1979. That's according to the National Snow and Ice Data Center. In a different study, scientists trying to understand how quickly ice in Antarctica is melting say they encountered, quote, an eerily warm ocean, and found that the warming ocean and marine heat waves are eroding coastal ice shelves and carving up the underside of the important Thwaites Glacier, with major implications for rising sea levels.
Yeah, like enough ice, if it melts, it'll raise the sea levels by about 2 feet around the world.
Finally, a bit of good news. Your next washing machine and refrigerator will be much cheaper to operate in a few years thanks to new energy efficiency rules proposed by the U.S. Department of Energy, the first efficiency upgrade to major appliances in more than 10 years. Once finalized, the agency says the new efficiency rules will reduce carbon emissions and collectively save Americans about $3.5 billion a year on energy and water bills.
Oh, let the complaining begin on Fox News of how they're coming to take away their washing machines. or something. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I'm looking at what's going on in East Palestine, Ohio, and again, this derailment is something that, we've talked about safety on the railroads for months now. We've been talking to people who work on the rails. We've been talking about the contract fight that was. And look, this isn't just the rails. This is virtually every industry. And the amount of money that they spend on lobbying, on getting rules that they want. I look at the fact that the Association of American Railroads spent in 2018 $4,737,989. Norfolk Southern themselves spent over $1 million lobbying against Obama-era regulations that would have done something on safety on brakes. And what happened? Trump reversed all of it. And again, corporate America, with their power and their lobbyists, they get what they want. And sadly, we're the ones who end up cleaning up the mess. And here to share some thoughts on what's going on in East Palestine, Ohio. On the ground, I've asked our good friend Jared Cassidy to come talk with us. Jared is the Assistant National Legislative Director with the Sheet Metal Air, Rail, and Transport Union, the SMART Union, smart-union.org, their website. Jared, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, thanks for having me again.
So, I'm looking at this, and again, I go back to this lobbying numbers. I go back to the amount of money that this industry spends on making sure that nobody's really looking over their shoulder, and the amount of money that they just pour into stuff other than safety, other than wages, hours, conditions for their workforce, into new equipment. It's mind-blowing, the waste, fraud, and abuse, if you will, of the resources that they have.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's amazing how much money they will spend to protect from spending money on the things they should be spending money on. And instead of, using their dollars and their profit to make sure that the railroad is safer for the men and women that I represent and for the people of East Palestine and for the men and women in all the communities that interact with the railroad. I mean, there's very little in this country that the railroad doesn't touch. And the fact that they spend the amount of money they do to make sure that they have the freedoms, if you will, that they get to enjoy away from regulation and from oversight that most other industries are not able to do. I mean, it is absolutely terrifying. And we're literally seeing it play out right now in a small town in Ohio with 1,500 residents questioning whether their very home that they've lived in for who knows how long is even safe to inhabit.
Yeah, I mean, this is the scary part of this. But, the reality is in 2022, Norfolk Southern profited, what was it, like $4.8 billion? And almost a lot, let's say a lot of that, I'm not sure the exact number, I'm sure you would know, they spent on stock buybacks. So, the fact that you've had 3 people on this train that was, 9,300 feet plus long, they're making billions of dollars, and what do they choose to do with it? Buy their stock back instead of having a 4th or a 5th or a 6th person on that train, so that maybe this doesn't happen. Who knows what? But it seems to me wasted resources that could be better spent.
Yeah, I mean the system is rigged, and it's I don't know how else to say it. I mean, here you have this derailment that has done all the damage that it's done. We're looking at millions of dollars of retribution or to spend to make the scene right, to hopefully make whole the folks that were displaced or financially harmed in this. But at the end of the day, when you do the numbers, it looks like 1.5% to 1.7% of the total profit that Norfolk Southern is going to have this year is going to be used in East Palestine. And to put that into perspective, it's already been projected that Norfolk Southern will fully financially recover from this accident by May. So they have displaced an entire village. They have polluted the airways. They have polluted the waterways, the soil in the rail bed that they have already laid. They've already put new tracks down. They're already running trains over. You cannot tell me that dirt, that environment is clean and properly vetted or protected against whatever chemicals may still be in there. I mean, the priority, as always in the railroad industry, is to get the track laid, to get the trains moving. They literally just kind of push the equipment to the side so that you can go through there, and that is priority number one. And then financially speaking, their number one goal, and it's been this way for years now, is the stock buybacks, is to make sure that Wall Street's protected and the hedge fund investors that have forced their way into this industry are recuperating or recovering the money that they demand that the railroads produce. And that is goal number one. They will tell you it's safety. I am a railroader. I represent railroaders, and I will tell you with absolute assurance, safety is not number one. It is profit. It is getting trains moving. Everything else comes later.
No, that's look, as someone who spent my entire career in the trucking industry, it's the same thing. They preach safety, practice something completely different. But fortunately, at least in the trucking industry, and as someone who has a union card, I've always felt empowered to say, you know what, this vehicle's not safe. I'm not moving it. I don't know that you can do that on the rails, especially when you're talking about a train. These two train derailments over the last couple of weeks, these things have been in excess of 9,300 feet. I don't know how three people, let alone wanting to have only one person, I don't know how you pre-trip that. I don't know how you know that all the couplings are right and everything. I have no idea how you go about caring for a 9,300 foot long vehicle.
It's not like it used to be. Once upon a time, when you get back into the history of railroading, and we had the caboose, you had a lot more. You had a lot more say as a conductor into the integrity of the train, or as to the overall safety, or even the opinion of, do you feel like this train is safe to take? 30, 40 years ago, a conductor or an engineer would be able to say, I'm not comfortable with this. We need to switch it out. We need to make changes. That doesn't occur today. It's always someone else mysteriously that has pre-inspected it for you. And in an era of carbon being eliminated from the railroad industry, it's mind-boggling the way in which our trains are always ready for us. I mean, we have what's called an air slip that tells us it's been inspected and we're instructed to go. If you look at the two trains, the train in East Palestine, the train just outside of Detroit that just derailed, both on Norfolk Southern, they're roughly 9,300 feet. I cannot speak to specifics in East Palestine, but I can tell you, looking at Detroit, that when you have these longer trains, generally speaking, the way the trains are made up are very concerning. It's extremely hard to build a train the way that makes physical sense. So if I'm an engineer, I want all my loads towards a locomotive, and then I want all of my empties on the rear end of the train.
Sure.
And if you think about it like a slinky, when you put the brakes on, you want the least amount of weight coming in on the heavy end. But on these longer trains, what we're seeing is it's not convenient for the railroad to build them ideally in a way that's ideal for the engineer to operate. And so all of this weight on the rear end, when you put on the brakes or when something goes wrong, it comes crashing in. And then the longer the train you have, and this is just simple physics. I mean, hopefully everyone understands this. The longer the train you have, the more weight you're going to have. And when an emergency brake application happens, which means something has gone wrong in the train or it's separated, if you have more weight on the rear end and a car, let's say the 20th car comes off the ground, all of that weight just comes piling in, and it exacerbates the derailment in such a way that it makes things worse when it comes to how things fall out, if you will. I mean, you're looking at tank cars that are being breached, and theoretically they really shouldn't be breached. So there are extreme forces at play, and inertia is what it is. And if you're moving something that's 20, 30, 40 million plus pounds, and 10, 15 million of it's behind this one car that has hit the ground and immediately gone from 40 miles an hour to a dead stop. That extra length is so much more dangerous in that instantaneous moment. And so that's why you hear us talking about train length. And I mean, we can go forever here where I'm a locomotive engineer, just moving a train that's that size or even longer, it's difficult. You know, the old saying, you run by the seat of your pants,
Right.
that could not be more true in the railroad industry. You literally run by the seat of your pants. Everything is feel. You're trying to feel if the train is stretched out like the slinky or if it's brought in. And if it's longer, this piece is stretched out, this piece is bunched up, this piece is stretched out. And you're just hoping the equipment that was built a long time ago and is not designed to haul all of this weight, you're just hoping it holds together. But in the instant it goes wrong, man, does it go wrong. And nothing has changed since East Palestine and the way that the operating practices are going. And in 2 weeks' time, I would like to think that the FRA and that the railroad themselves have had enough time to analyze this to say, hey, this is a problem. We can see this. We've had 2 wrecks in less than a week's time. We need to make these changes, but we haven't seen that. What we have seen is a railroad that is doing everything in its power to cover up or to correct a situation where they had this major derailment. They just want it to go away. That's all they want it to do is go away. And why do they want it to go away? Because time is their friend. As soon as they have that break, the faster they're able to have people forget about it, with exception to East Palestine, but everybody else, as soon as it's gone from the media, operations go back to the way they are, and we cannot allow that in the railroad industry. And that's why I'm so very thankful that you're still talking about this subject.
No, we just had on Representative Chris DeLuzio, and I asked him that very question. You know, once this is out of the media, off the front pages, does this just get swept under the rug and go back to business as usual? And he seemed optimistic that this wouldn't. I'm not quite that optimistic. Because I know, the Republican Party right now, and you don't have to come here with me, but I know right now the Republican Party, all up in arms, attacking the Biden administration, is attempting to change the narrative away from this is the responsibility of this rail company, this is the responsibility of deregulation, to, well, it's Joe Biden's fault. They're working overtime to change the narrative. And sadly, I've had a lot of people reach out to me, not even talking about the railroad anymore. They're just talking about the cleanup. And I think we have to focus on why the cleanup is happening, who's responsible for the cleanup, and so that we make sure that it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, the fact is that we had something go wrong in a train, and it should not be acceptable in the United States of America to say, hey, we had a failure, whether it's a mechanical failure or a power failure, whatever the failure may be. It should not be okay for us to say, well, we had this failure. We can just move on and we can accept the next one that comes along with it too. I was talking to someone today, and this thought came to my mind. If you're boarding an airplane, and literally as you're walking through the door to get into this airplane, the pilot comes out of the cockpit, turns to you, looks you in the eye and says, this plane is not safe to fly, but the carrier is absolutely going to make me take you all anyway. Do you still get on that airplane?
Not a chance.
No, and this is what we're telling you as the railroad employees, and not just you. I mean, we're telling everybody. We run these trains. We are the pilots of these trains. They are not safe. And you don't have the opportunity or the decision to climb on our train, but instead you're forced to accept us coming through your community with, ungodly amounts of commodities. I mean, the volume of what we haul is terrifying. And when you look at all that stuff and you see what precision scheduled railroading has done to this industry, and the way it's reduced manpower, the way it's reduced inspections, it is not a safe environment. And we are absolutely screaming in the bullhorn here that if East Palestine is not the wake-up call, what in God's name is it going to take for us to have a wake-up call in the railroad industry? Because East Palestine is a smaller area. Is the next one going to be Chicago? Is it going to be New York City? Is it going to be my hometown of Nashville, Tennessee? This is not sustainable. We cannot allow it to continue. We have got to have more oversight. We have got to have more regulation, and we have got to have more legislation. And I'm telling you too, we have got to let the employees speak, and people need to listen to them on what's going on because they are looking out for everyone else, including themselves. And we have something to say. We have something to add here, and our input has value. And there's no one better suited for us to fix it. The railroads created this problem. It is an asinine thought to think they're the ones to fix it when the ship is sinking and they're the ones throwing water into the ship, helping it sink. They're not going to be the ones to right the ship. That's us. We know how to do that. And so again, I mean, it's the conversation continues.
You're listening to the Rick Smith Show here with Jared Cassidy. Jared's the Assistant National Legislative Director for the Smart Union Sheet Metal, Air, Rail, and Transport Union, smart-union.org, their website. We'll get links out on social media how you can take a look at that. Now, you were talking about the length of the trains, and I saw a Government Accountability Office report that said that between 2008 and 2019, the lengths of trains have increased by 25%, which, would bear out to what you've been saying. From 2019 to 2023, because of the pandemic, because of the supply chain shortage, has that number grown even larger? Will we see another report that it's grown another 25%?
Yes, absolutely. And the railroads have even doubled down within the last, I want to say 6 to 8 months, and said that the trains are even going to continue to grow longer. Rick, we have trains that have been operated in America that are in excess of 5 miles long. If 5 miles long is not too long, then I ask the question, what is? If we don't put a number on it, there is no limit to how far this goes. And the reason that we're seeing this occur is in the pursuit of that holy grail of profit. You cannot keep extending these trains in the way that they are. Number one, the infrastructure is not built for it. It congests the system. It causes a whole lot of heartache for the people that live in the communities where there are crossings, because it is impossible for a railroad crew not to stop and block a crossing, and it creates a whole lot of stoppage or congestion to the interstate commerce. And because I just said commerce, I want to tell you the railroads use the Commerce Clause in the United States Constitution and the Commerce Clause within the Interstate Commerce Commission Termination Act as a get out of jail free card. And that cannot happen anymore either. The Commerce Clause in the Constitution doesn't belong to the railroads. It belongs to the citizens of the United States of America. And what it says is that goods in this nation should have a free path to get to market. But these long trains are congesting the system. You cannot move freight on a system that is not able to allow fluidity when it goes through. If I'm in this gigantic train and I stop and I've got the main line blocked and I've got the siding blocked, not only have I stopped myself, I've stopped every other train along the system that goes along with it. And it shuts down everything. The other piece to this is you cannot deliver freight safely or effectively to customers with these gigantic trains. They, in and of themselves, are actually violating the Commerce Clause by doing what they're doing. But what they do is they walk into these state capitals and these hearing rooms on the Hill, and I'm on the Hill, I witness it, and they use the Commerce Clause as if we're the railroads, we can do whatever we want because we own this piece of commerce. And that is not true. And it's time that we start taking that back too.
Let me ask you this then, since you brought this up, because I've got a lot of listeners who've reached out and said it's time for us to either use the Federal Trade Commission to break them up because they're monopolies, they're too big. And I've had a lot of people even say that, maybe it's time to nationalize these. Any response to either of those ideas?
So breaking them up, I don't know a whole lot about it. I would be curious to hear more. As for nationalism, Rick, if I had more faith in the government, I would say sure. But, knowing how dysfunctional Washington, D.C. is at this point and the way that the parties work or don't work together, depending on how you want to look at it, that gives me a lot of pause in trying to say that. Right now, what I think we need, in my personal opinion, is that we need someone to own this, first of all, that actually in the government to own it. and then to start actually putting forth legislation and regulation and holding true to the oversight piece of the railroads. And I am a wholehearted believer in allowing a reporting system that the employees can actually report what's occurring to them, one, on safety conditions, and two, on service issues. If we have the ability to say, hey, my train broke in two today and it shouldn't have broken two today, I want to let you know. Or if I got one axle off or two axles off on the ground, I'm going to report that to the FRA so that they can make sure the railroads are reporting in the way that's necessary. Why is that important? Because right now, the way things stand in this country, and even with the FRA and the way they regulate the industry, they don't police the industry. Everything that they get comes from the railroads. Even when they regulate and they look at equipment standards, you know who provides the equipment standards so that the FRA knows how to hold the railroads accountable? They literally depend on the railroads to provide them with the standards so that they know how to enforce the standards. The system is not built for public safety. It is built for the railroads to just do what they've been doing ever since their inception, and that is railroad the people of the United States of America. East Palestine is being railroaded right now. My members are being railroaded right now. And so, is there merit into looking at, breaking up the monopolies? Is there merit into looking at nationalization of the railroad? There could be, but I don't think that we have a government in place that can get anything done. My fear is it may actually get worse because I haven't seen them work together since I've been here.
Yeah. No, I mean, if there's anything they should be working together on, it should be this. But the breakup, comes to me with people saying, back in the 80s, there were, 30, 40 different railroads back then? You would know. I'm not sure. But, all of this deregulation, all of this consolidation has happened 1980s forward. The idea is to go back to having, much smaller companies being, more nimble to be able to move stuff faster and maybe not have these big, gigantic trains. Any value in that?
There could be. I mean, there's competition, and I don't know how you break them up and give them to smaller entities at this point. But I mean, there very well could be, Rick. I mean, really, I'm just spitballing here with you at this point. I don't know, and I don't even know how we get back to that.
Well, because here's the thing: this ain't working.
No, it's not working.
Outweighed power that these companies have, just not working. Last question I've got for you: one of the Republican congressmen threw out that Biden's infrastructure plan didn't fix the rails, and kind of threw out this idea that because Biden and the infrastructure money didn't do something on the rails, this happened. Any reality in that? Who takes care of the tracks?
No, there's no reality in that. This is a private industry. The railroad companies take care of their own tracks. The last thing that would have ever come out of there is a whole lot more money coming at the railroads. I mean, when you look at the profit margins these railroads have, and they literally brag every single day in the media and on the Hill about how much money they put into their own industries. The infrastructure package had nothing to do with that.
Okay.
If we really want to start pointing fingers, we need to look back to the last administration, because what happened under the last administration was detrimental to the railroad industry going forward. You can look at the Federal Railroad Administration. Under the Trump White House, what happened in the FRA? They decided to completely gut the Office of Safety and reorganize it in a way that doesn't look like any other agency under the DOT umbrella. But what it did do was create points of contact and liaisons, singular points of contact liaisons between the FRA and the carrier that meet on weekly or bi-weekly basis to make sure that the railroads are able to present to FRA what their goals are going to be for the coming future and how the FRA can help them get to where they want to go. And you know who's left out? We are.
The workers. Nope. And this is where over the summer you guys were sounding the warning. Nobody listened. But Jared, I appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Good stuff. Jared Cassidy. He is the Assistant National Legislative Director there at the Smart Union, smart-union.org, their website. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1932. That was the day that working people in the United States said goodbye to one of their great heroes. Florence Kelley was born in 1859. Her father, William D. Kelley, was a U.S. Senator. Senator Kelley was an abolitionist and was concerned about the conditions under which working people toiled. He passed that concern on to his daughter. Florence enjoyed the finest education, studying at Cornell University, the University of Zurich, and the Union College of Law. She became a vocal opponent of child labor and sweatshop conditions. She found camaraderie with like-minded women, including Jane Addams and Ellen Gates Starr at Hull House in Chicago. Kelley soon became an important addition to the work of this famed settlement house. Jane Addams' nephew remembered her as the finest rough-and-tumble fighter for the good life of others that Hull House ever knew. She began to visit local factories around Hull House to document unsafe working conditions and the use of child labor. Based on her careful research, the Illinois legislature passed a law banning children under the age of 14 from working in factories. Florence was named the first ever chief factory inspector in the state of Illinois. From Chicago, she moved on to New York, where she helped to found the National Consumer League. The league supported the fight for the 8-hour workday and was a leader in the fight against sweatshops. Florence was also a founding member of the NAACP. She helped to found the National Child Labor Committee, a group dedicated to ending child labor. In response to their work, in 1912, the U.S. Children's Bureau became part of the federal government. It was the only federal agency at the time run by women. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Please Be My Valentine. That is not only a warm, sweet, sometimes romantic sentiment people express in mid-February on frilly red cards. It's also the name of a 3rd century saint who literally lost his head, a 9th century pope whose reign lasted only 40 days, 3 Roman emperors, a very good Mexican hot sauce, and a tiny town in Texas. That town has a genuinely sweet story to tell and a unique role to play in the sending of thousands of Valentine's Day sentiments to people around the world. Valentine, Texas, population 217, was founded by the Southern Pacific Railroad in the 1880s and reportedly was named for one of the corporation's big shareholders. Nothing romantic about that. But in recent years, would-be Cupids have turned the town's name and, believe it or not, its one-room post office into a center of affectionate expression. What happened is that romantics from distant places began to batch up their pre-addressed stamped valentines and zip them to this postal outpost way out on the Texas-Mexico border. Why? Because to give their sentimental missives extra oomph, they wanted them to bear the special touch of being mailed from an actual place named Valentine. The greatest thing about our public postal workers is that they literally deliver, and the Valentine branch goes the extra mile to provide this loving gesture at no extra charge. Ismelda Ornelas, postmaster of the 79854 office, hand stamps each envelope herself. Indeed, the Valentine Post Office is now officially designated the Love Station. Moreover, the local school district holds an annual art contest among students to design each year's Valentine postmark, which is then stamped on each envelope. This is Jim Hightower saying, see, while the media tells us our world is going to hell, here's another grassroots example of loving, creative people going the other way. Happy Valentine's Day.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
I got to tell you, in talking with Jared Cassidy from the Smart Union, one of the things that I didn't ask him, and we're going to get the answer to next week, how old were those rail cars? You know, and how many of them had to be breached? You know, there were 5 of them that had the vinyl chloride on it. You know, how many of them had to be blown up to get to them? Was all 5? Was that a bit excessive? And the age of those cars. Now, understand, you know, the rail industry, enormous amounts of stock buybacks. You know, couldn't they have used, and this is what I've been talking about for a long time, they're saying, we've got no productive use for this money, we're just going to put it in our pockets. Couldn't they have bought maybe some new cars? Maybe ones that wouldn't have malfunctions? Just kind of a thought. but we will get some answers next week on that. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on the top stories of the day, my good friend Bob Ney, former Ohio congressman and political analyst. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you, Rick.
So, you're an Ohio guy. Ohio's doing some fun stuff. Evidently, we're going to be cutting state income and property taxes and cutting education by $1 billion too. Because we need to help. We need to help make sure that that property owners and the well-to-do get better off.
I mean, technically, and people know this who live in Ohio, it's a pretty low tax state as it stands.
Yeah, I'm like, how are you going to cut more taxes from that? But I know how they're going to take it from education. And sadly, what we've been seeing across the country is this move to undoing child labor laws. So we won't educate them, pipeline right into crummy low-wage jobs, America's future.
Well, I mean, it's going to be tough. They have to balance, their budget. It's going to have to go through a process, but this all will happen by around July the 1st, whatever they do. Of course, I can't imagine how they're not going to get the education community up in arms.
Yeah, I saw that the first bill Republicans in your state put up was more tax cuts, and I'm just scratching my head, going, "That's your biggest problem? Not that little thing up in East Palestine? Now you've got family somewhere in that neighborhood, don't you?"
Oh, I own a house there. Both my children, all my grandchildren, we're all there. Everybody. And I'm 74 miles, as the crow flies, 52, but we're in that big circle of the 100. And we're 30 miles down from Steubenville, where the water, was contaminated. Now, the local St. Clairsville water system says, well, their water comes, I don't know, from a different source, but I don't know about the riverfront cities. And plus, as you know, Rick, there's not been enough transparency on this all the way around, period.
No.
Period.
No, none of this stuff ever gets the kind of transparency we should, and this is what has happened in all of these things. So, am I surprised by it? No. Is this Biden's fault? I don't think it's his fault. I wish he would have taken a more active role. I wish Pete Buttigieg would have said more. But ultimately, this is a state's issue. Why wasn't DeWine screaming for the state? They only just yesterday asked for FEMA resources.
Right. There was a debate about that of why they didn't. And then I looked into at first they said, well, Trump did this rule. And I looked into that. And from what I saw, the rule was, as they said in the article, hollowed by the Obama administration, further hollowed by the Trump administration. Then nobody afterwards said, well, maybe we should put that rule back about this, device that would have seen that the bearing was on fire,
Now, if I remember right, during the Obama years, they tried to put more regulation in place for a different braking system. Because if you remember, out west, we were having bomb trains all over the place.
Out west?
Yeah. Remember, up like North Dakota, they were forever. There were the oil car tankers were derailing, and they were calling them bomb trains.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yes.
And if you remember right, the Obama era, they pushed for some regulations to change the braking system, of which the industry, pushed heavily against. And Trump, when he came into office, wiped them all out. So the question is could that have could have stopped this? I don't know. I'm not going to say yes or no, but I do know that deregulation, not in this case, not helpful.
Well, correct. I mean, rarely is it ever helpful anyway. I think we kind of know that.
Have we learned that though? I mean, look, you were a Republican congressman. Part of all of this stuff started during the Reagan era forward. There were people, my Republican friends were the ones saying, job killing regulations, Bob.
Well, and then it went from, the deregulation to the trying to privatize the entire country, period, too, up and down. So I think hopefully we've learned our lesson.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Yeah. Now, I guess the other question that I didn't ask is, how is your family doing? Were you in the evacuation zone? I mean, are they safe? Are they okay?
Oh yeah, they weren't in the evacuation zone now, but they were in the circle like everybody else. 5 million people in that whole basin there, with the water supply, but also they're in the circle where you had to watch. And my daughter sent me something which was so weird. It said, well, don't worry, the wind went northeast instead of south or southeast, which I thought, okay, don't everybody worry down the Ohio Valley, but gee, if you were northeast, maybe you should have worried. When you see stuff like this, you just say, you got to be kidding me. And then, of course, the railroad offered, they said $5 each, but that it was $1,000 each. But that's not the point to offer them $1,000 each. They wouldn't show up because they were afraid of the, quote, violence of the employee, towards the employees. And, Norfolk and Southern will hide their heads on this. And throwing $1,000 out there is not going to be anything of value, because what about going back there? 3,500 fish died. 3,500. What about the saturation in the soil? Who's going to buy, if anybody has to leave, tell me, would you buy a house in East Palestine?
Nope.
I wouldn't.
Nope. And that whole area is going to be under a cloud for decades.
Right, exactly. So, my daughter took precautions. They said to not drink the water, to boil it, and she, like everybody else, are doing that. Then, of course, bottled water is flying off the shelves. So everybody's trying to see what they can do to get bottled water. But I think the real problem is just they need to have, constant, transparent information. There ought to be a website where it says the water supply in Blair, Ohio, and Shadyside, Ohio, down Marietta, Ohio, and down to Kentucky. These are the tests. These are when we did them. This is the outcome.
So who should be responsible for that? Where does that come from? Do you trust the industry to do
no
it? Do
question.
you trust Norfolk Southern? Or is it Ohio's and Pennsylvania's responsibility? Is it the federal government? Who do we lay that at the feet of?
The transparency and science issue right now, it should be the under the responsibility of the Fed and the states, period. The scientists. I don't want Norfolk and Southern telling me what they found or didn't find.
Because they're never going to find anything.
Yeah. So I want the state and the Fed to do that. But the responsibility of this is Norfolk and Southern. And now the Congress needs to also, in Buttigieg, but transportation, but they need to determine what type of safety brake do you need?
Yeah.
Go back to when they started to hollow these safety features out. What do you need? So that'll be the job of the lawmakers. And I would assume somebody better get on it right away.
Yeah, I'm still
but
waiting for
legislation. The absolute responsibility to me of this catastrophe is going to be Norfolk and Southern. Oh, by the way, there was one other thing. These chemicals, as I understand it, were not labeled hazardous.
Yeah, the railroad has a weird kind of setup. I spend a lot of time going into rail yards, because my job is to shuttle, trailers back and forth from our terminal to the rail yards. And, I've taken hazmat into rail yards that it has to be placarded on the road. And then they make me take the placards off once it goes into the rail yard. I've had that happen on a number of occasions because they have very different kind of labeling requirements. And then sometimes I've been able to drive them on the road without placards that they want placard on. It's really, there doesn't seem to be any consistency between rail and the road, where you would think there might be something. It seems odd to me, but they've got some weird kind of requirements that I don't understand.
Well, they're also tough to deal with too.
Oh God, are they?
Horrible. It goes back to when I was safety director of the city of Blair. They sprayed all the cars with paint, and then it took almost an act of the Lord to get them to pay for it.
No, you tell me. I know all about how difficult they can be, and this is the problem with having these companies that are so big, so powerful, with such outweighed resources to be able to lobby and demand whatever they want, and to be able to hold the country hostage in the event that they don't get what they want.
Correct. Yeah, and like I said, they're one of the worst to deal with.
And the weird thing is you can go back through the history of this country. Rail barons have always been the worst of the worst. You go back to the old Jay Gould. Well, he was credited with saying, "I could easily pay half the working class to murder the other half." Are you surprised that we still have that kind of mentality here?
True, that's true.
I mean, it's wow.
It does go back.
But I'm good to hear that you and your family safe, everybody well. But I said from the beginning, where are the rail companies bringing in bottled water? There should be train loads of it coming in.
And there's just so much fear and anger, but a lot of fear by people, and just not enough was done. And like I said, my family's fine. We think, like all the rest, we don't know.
Yeah.
No, my daughter and I talked about it today, and my son. They're just going to continue to take the precautions because we really just don't know.
Now, Trump supposedly is coming to your neck of the woods on Wednesday. Any idea why Trump would come to this at this moment? And is it? I mean, he's going to bring paper towels. I don't know. And what?
Well, JD Vance got into the thing with Buttigieg, then of course Manchin, and so I think Trump's just coming because he sees an issue.
Yeah. See, I get that. I get JD Vance, and I get your governor, and I get people from Ohio and people from Pennsylvania and West Virginia, going, hey, what are you doing, Pete? Because they actually have the means to hold him accountable. Trump just looking for attention, I think, and I would argue going to make the situation worse by clogging up scarce resources and the ability to move around, because he just doesn't come by himself. He's not coming into town on a bicycle or a horse.
Right, and he also hasn't went to other sites where there has been some type of disaster. I think this is probably J.D. Vance asking him to come in there. I would honestly assume.
Yeah, well, we'll see. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show with Bob Ney, former Ohio Congressman and political analyst. I wanted to get your thoughts on the balloon gate.
Oh, I hear the word balloon one more time. Oh, did you see the poor group? I think they're in Illinois. I could be wrong. And they put up these balloons. It's some little balloon group, right? Some older guys that do these little balloons to see things or whatever. And I guess they said, well, we had a balloon up there, and all of a sudden it stopped transmitting. So I think we're just shooting anything down now at potential. And now there's balloon détente, where our Secretary of State is going to meet in Munich with his counterpart from China, and they're going to kind of use the Munich setting to get past the balloon. So, it's balloon fever.
Oh, God.
It came into the country. We shot it down. But now it seems, like I said, that we're shooting everything under the sun.
And, I look at this, and again, I go back to what I said from the beginning. It shows that we're just not we're not the people that we were 40 years ago. We seem to be very skittish.
You made a point on your show the other day. How does – okay, it's a balloon. It was from China. It was shot down. But how does this whole thing grip so many people in the nation? We shot it down. Okay, yell at China. Send a balloon over to them. I don't know. Do something. Yell. But, it's done. We weren't invaded with incoming missiles.
No, but if you listen to the F channel and you listen to right-wing media, and I guess the defense I will make for today's generation is, there was no F channel when I was a kid. There was no, blathering right-wing hate machine, trying to get us all outraged every minute of every day. So, maybe who knows what would have happened back then. And also we had elected leaders who weren't hair on fire. Right now we've got elected leaders who are, every day tweeting out these insane things that they have to know aren't true, but it's still got to get the attention. Need to get on the F channel, need to get on the podcast circuit, need to get my name out there, Bob. I got to make my star.
Well, like I said today, a lot of the things going on in Congress are entertainment. Some of the things going on in the corporate media are entertainment, and that's what it boils down to: entertainment. Yeah. And it's in a lot of cases sick entertainment.
Now, look, when you were in Congress, I didn't always agree with you, but I respected you, and I respected. I didn't always agree with other people, but I respected them. You were doing a job. Now, look, crazy. And I don't know how we go back to this. Maybe, there's part of me that hopes this whole trial by the voting companies, by the voting systems companies with the F channel there. That maybe we start breaking some of this stuff up and people start paying attention. Because you've been following what's coming out of this trial?
Oh, yes.
I mean, it's incredible. I mean, the things that they were saying behind the scenes while emailing each other and behind the scenes saying, they don't believe any of this stuff and we should, fire reporters for questioning the president. And then, the base believing every word that they blather out on air is just, I got to wonder, will the viewers eventually go, we were lied to?
I don't know. I mean, everything's so turned upside down. Steny Hoyer, the number 2 Democrat in the House, he gave his exit speech, not from office, but from the leadership position. And his exit speech was the psychology of consensus. And it's a very if you Google it, Steny Hoyer, the psychology of consensus, it's a very interesting speech. Now, not just because my name's in it, okay, but the fact of the points he makes, which goes right back to what you were saying about when I was there and whether you agreed or not. If you look at his points, because people say, "Oh, Bob, you're old and you're just thinking, that it was different," and it wasn't different. Yes, it was different. Sure, some things happened, but this whole psychosis, paranoia, the conspiracy theorists were just considered some like wackos, just in the corner of some states here and there.
Yep.
And now they dominate people's theories. I have friends of mine, Rick, that have literally lost their minds, that have bought into things where I say, you've got to be kidding me. Not things that aren't ever believable.
I saw, someone sent me a funny response, and they said that, QAnon is Scientology for hillbillies. And I go, I got to be honest, there's some truth in that.
People follow the QAnon. Like I said, they come up with theories. I've had people send me messages saying, this is what happens. That's what happens. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. I mean, I personally had people come to me and say, well, this is what people in Congress do. And I'm like, not on this planet. They don't.
Yeah,
they don't drink children's blood. I mean, that's actually out there. Some people believe that.
Oh, I know. You should see the stuff I get. I'm sure you've gotten much, much worse over the years. But again, it comes back down to, we don't talk to each other anymore. We find our little silos and then we throw bombs at each other. And if I hear the words, do your own research one more time, I am going to scream, because it's usually said by someone who has no idea what doing research actually is. I'm sorry, watching YouTube videos with your pants around your ankles on the can is not doing research.
I've been asked the question, when will this change, or how will this change? More importantly, I'm not sure it changes from the ground up this case. People in leadership in both parties that have any kind of common sense brain know this all is going the wrong direction.
Yeah.
If they could step up to the plate and say, well, wait a minute, and go back to the way, it used to be, that would help.
Yeah, Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan getting drunk together
would help.
Yeah, because you guys used to get together, family picnic stuff, right? Isn't that how it used to be? I mean, the famous stories of Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan getting drunk together. Wasn't that part of it?
Sure. Yeah, it was. And I mean, I'm not going to give this person up because they're currently in Congress and they're very well known. But when I got in trouble, my phone rang. I remember exactly where I was. I was up in Columbus, Ohio, and I was with my kids, and the phone rang, and a member of Congress, a Democrat, this wasn't the only call I had, they said, are you okay? How's your children? They knew Bob, Bobby and Kayla was their name. And is there anything I can do? Anything. You need help. You need money. You need and that's from if I said the person's name, everybody'd be like, what? That's the way it was.
Yeah.
It's just the way it was.
Maybe there's a way back. And look, I keep thinking that the way forward is doing away with a lot of this really insane stuff that calls themselves media, and holding them more accountable. And maybe this lawsuit by Dominion and the other one are going to Maybe that could be the beginning. I don't know.
I think it was a good lawsuit because it was outrageous.
Yep. And the discovery that's coming out of it is outrageous.
Sure.
And again, it's one of those things where, believe what's said in the courtroom. Don't believe what they're blathering on in front of you.
Yeah, exactly. I think the lawsuit's healthy, and maybe it'll put some fear into people that they just can't go about doing what they want to do. That's why I think the Georgia grand jury is so important.
Yep.
It's important. They've already said they think people purge themselves. That's important. Where people actually, as a collusive group, tried to undo an election of a president.
Scary, scary times. But, Bob, I appreciate the time as always. I hope everyone is safe and stays in good shape there. I hope this gets cleaned up and we move forward and people are held accountable. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Man, I can't imagine. I'll tell you, I can't imagine what it would be like to be in that situation. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. So The Guardian had a really interesting story. Evidently, according to The Guardian's most recent reporting, Taliban fighters have stopped the sale of contraceptives in 2 of Afghanistan's main cities, claiming their use by women is a Western conspiracy to control the Muslim population. They write, The Guardian has learned that the Taliban has been going door to door, threatening midwives and ordering pharmacies to clear their shelves of all birth control medicines and devices. I read this and my mind immediately went to, you change one word, you change 2 words in that sentence. Change the word Taliban and change the word Afghanistan, and you got, well, what's going on right here? Well, I guess 3. You take out Muslim. Christian extremists are stopping the sale of contraceptives. It's what's going to happen over the summer. Get ready for the Christian warriors, freedom fighters, if you will, to be picketing out in front of your local CVS and your Walgreens and your stores, because you've got a former vice president who's running for president saying, we're going to ban those abortion pills. There is a movement right now. There's organizing happening. I'm telling you, it's happening. They are putting together their plot to get out there and to force these pharmacies to no longer sell any of this stuff. And look, the power that they wield and the commitment to harass and intimidate, I fear what happens for women in this country. And again, you're going to find states that are attempting right now to stop the male purchase of contraception. Right now, it's the abortion pill, but you know where this is going. They never stop. So to me, I saw that report and I'm going, wow, that's frightening. But I could see it happening. I could see it happening right here. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, make sure you download the podcast wherever you find your favorite podcasts. From Stitcher to Podbean and everywhere in between, you will find our podcast. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Something I said got under your skin, made you think. Definitely want to hear it. If you're in East Palestine, let me know. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to